Hello. Today I'd like to introduce you to a book I've just published on Soren Kierkegaard. And many of you who know me know that I'm pretty excited about this philosopher and thinker. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about this book and why I wrote it. So first of all, the title. Soren Kierkegaard's Theology of Encounter, an Edifying and Polemical Life. It's a bit of a mouthful. But then so is much of what Kierkegaard wrote. It was a mouthful. And Kierkegaard is primarily known as someone who is a philosopher of the individual. And he looked at the psychology of the human self, really was thinking about despair and anxiety and the torment of coming to moral decisions. And so he gets this reputation of being a very gloomy, isolated, individual thinker. And that was what was to be celebrated. But actually, I think that he has more to say about our life together in society and our social life together. So that's what I set out to write about, and that's why I wanted to emphasize encounter, these connections and relationships that I think he can help us think through a bit more. To begin with, I would say that Kierkegaard saw two main problems in society that I was going to address. And so the first one is this kind of flattening out of society that he started to notice in the 1800s that mass communication was making people a bit shallow, or he started to think that there was a kind of shallowness to society. And so this idea of public opinion now being the highest regard of what truth is, rather than finding it in ourselves or in our local communities and churches or whatever. So now public opinion became the big thing. And he had a problem with that. The second issue was the role of the church in Danish society. This was a time when confirmation was a legal necessity. So everyone who was born in Denmark became confirmed. And basically it was just assumed that if you were living in Denmark, you were a Christian. And that somehow European culture and history and Christianity were all kind of mixed together into one identity. So that simply to be a good middle-class Danish citizen and to be a Christian were exactly the same thing. And Kierkegaard didn't think that this was the right way to think about religious life and social life. So in that case, he wanted to separate the individual from these things, from this shallow public opinion kind of society, and from this generic nationalist Christianity. So he's going to pull the individual away from that. But what I want to talk about is how he actually reintroduces the individual into a more loving society. So the way I do that is to go through kind of three places where these encounters will take place. So one of them is in the church. He invites people to come into church, but he gives them a warning. And this is the polemical side. He says, watch your step when you enter the house of the Lord. Because here is where you're going to confront God and God's transcendence, and where we have to consider ourselves in our in our weakness, or the fact that we are dependent on others and on God. So there's a watch your step when you enter the church, and that's supposed to unsettle us a little bit. But then also there's a call to the altar in his Lutheran context, where Christ says, "Come here, all you who are burdened, and I will give you rest." And then from there, he says, there should be a message going out of the church that says, go and love much. So now this is the more edifying side of things, to build people up, to love much. So now we move into the second piece, the second encounter, which is with society and the public and the press. These areas where he thinks, it's making society quite shallow. So we have an encounter with the public, a critical encounter, much like we do here at CCS with our social analysis. He wants to engage in that kind of thing. And then the upbuilding part, the edifying part, is works of love. So I spend a lot of time talking about this book that he wrote called Works of Love, which is about how to identify, how to become the neighbor, identify the neighbor, and love the neighbor. So that's the second encounter with society and our neighbors. The third one is to go back into the church and look at this, what he would call the church triumphant. So this European 19th century church that saw itself as the pinnacle of history and reason and good thought. And he wants to challenge that and bring the church back more to thinking about where it would be situated if it was in like Jesus' time. So to think of itself as to becoming more contemporary with Christ, which would mean being more of a disciple, even perhaps to the point of martyrdom. But what he means by that is more about taking the risk and the challenge of actually being in the marginalized position in society. So there's actually a move towards, becoming a church without authority. This is a phrase that he uses near the end, and it's one that I speak about a lot. So this idea of becoming a disestablished church, or a church without authority, and even what he would refer to as a militant church, which for him means critical, but also upbuilding a society of neighbors. So that's the kind of structure of this book. There's lots more in there, and if you want, you can ask me about it or take a look at it yourself.